Hello, we are in 2 Nephi chapter 15, which is Isaiah chapter 5. And this is a continuation of thought. So, and you always know that's the case when the chapter begins with and. And so you're kind of continuing on. And this chapter begins with and then. So because it says and then, we need to know what happened before the and then. And when we look at that, we look at the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and by the spirit of burning. And then he talks about this dwelling place of Mount Zion and the protection of cloud and smoke by day and a flaming fire by night, and this tabernacle and a place of refuge. So once Israel or the covenant people have found that place and have been purged of their sins, and then it says, will I sing to my well-beloved. So interesting. He doesn't say he's going to sing to Israel. He says he's going to sing to his well-beloved. And who is his well-beloved? This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. A song of my beloved touching his vineyard. So this is all about Christ's relationship with us. And if we skip down to verse 7 in this chapter, it says, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. So the house of Israel very often symbolizes the covenant people, those who claim to be the people of God, who are the covenant people, those who are in a covenant with him. So this is about God's relationship with his, and I'm going to say quote unquote, people. Because as we saw in the previous chapters and we heard about the sins and the woes and all that, we know that the covenant people tend to not be very Christ-like for very long. And here's the song. So the song says, my well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. So fruit can literally mean fruit. You know, in the Garden of Eden, it produced fruit of its own. It didn't need to be tended to. It just, they just plucked and ate. It was fruit, and it was literal fruit. We have fruit of the earth, but very often fruit refers to what the acts or the doings of a people, what it produces, what is the outcome, what is the yield, what is the produce that is coming forth from this vineyard or these covenant people. And so he says, my well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. So this begins where at one point it was a very fruitful hill, and because of this relationship, he fenced it, and verse 2, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a wine press therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. Okay, so we're going to just unpack this verse. So he fenced it, he gathered out the stones, he planted it with the choicest vine. And with this, we're going to read John chapter 15, verses 1 through 2 and 4 through 5. I am the vine. This is Christ speaking. And my Father is the husbandman. So Christ refers to himself as the vine. He is the choicest vine. So in this vineyard is where you would find this choicest vine. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit. And again, we see this metaphor of fruit in a vineyard and over and over again. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. And this is actually very pertinent to the chapter we are reading here. So he tends to it, just like any good gardener or farmer would tend to his plants to make sure they're producing at their maximum potential. Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. And this really sums up the chapter here. It really describes it. This is the relationship of the vineyard to the most precious vine of all. If we stay in the vine and we hold to the vine, then we are productive. Then we accomplish what we cannot accomplish on our own. And without that relationship to the vine, why then we become quite useless in the grand scheme of things. Regardless of what we may accomplish in worldly terms, in the grand scheme of the plan of salvation and of everything, we are useless. I am the vine, verse 5. We are still in John chapter 15. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, ye can do nothing. And that is pretty much the message of this whole chapter. And it's summed up beautifully in John chapter 15. So as we're reading this chapter, just keep that in mind, our relationship to the vine, because this is what this is about. And again, he's addressing the covenant people, those who are in a covenant with God, those who call themselves Christians. And it's really important to point that out, because somehow, as I've done research for this chapter, everybody I've listened to about this chapter in Isaiah chapter 5, they immediately get on their soapbox and just talk about everything that's wrong with the world. Yeah, we know the world is mistaken and the world has a lot of problems, but this specifically is addressed to the people of his vineyard. And as we see in chapter 7, it says, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, or the covenant people. So it is just really sad to see that people take this chapter as an opportunity to just address every woe and ill and sin in the world without self-reflection. And this is part of the problem, is that Christians love to cast and to condemn, or to condemn other people without having to take a hard, cold look at themselves in the mirror. And this chapter is telling you to do that if you are a Christian. And unfortunately, I challenge you to look up Isaiah 5, and people will just spend the entire time talking about the woes and the ills of the world. And this isn't a song about them. Again, so this song begins and it says that he had a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it and he gathered it. This is a relationship. This is the pruning. This is the delicate pruning of a farmer or a gardener who's trying to refine his plant. And built a tower. Very often a tower is put somewhere so that a person can see a way off. They can see what's coming. And so this can be symbolic of revelation, of prophecy, of a prophet, of warnings, of things, information that they are privy to because of this relationship and being in the vineyard and having that privilege. In the midst of it, the tower's in the midst of it. And also made a winepress therein. Okay, so winepress, this is a thing that people just pass on by, like it has no meaning. We know that a wine press in old times, now it's a little different how it works, but in old times, it was just a trough where the grapes were, they were thrown in there and they were trodden or they were stepped on, usually with no shoes. And the right amount of pressure had to be put on the grapes. So that's why there had to be no shoes, because you couldn't just like stomp on them. This wasn't a situation where it's like, hey, let's get anvil shoes on. Now we'll really get the juice out. That's not how it works. In fact, if you step on the grapes too intensely, then you're going to crush the seeds as well. And you're going to release tannins in the wine and make it bitter and bad. Too many tannins ruin a wine. So the right amount of pressure needs to be applied in order to extract the juice correctly. And too much pressure is going to ruin the whole batch. And that's just the beginning, of course, of winemaking, you know, harvesting the grapes, putting them in the wine press, and then stepping on them or applying the pressure in order to extract the juice. That's the beginning. So in the scripture here, it says, and also he put the wine press right there in the vineyard. So whatever fruit to extract the juice, if this is symbolic of fruit is the works of those who are in the covenant, then he put that refinement process right in the vineyard. And he applied the right amount of pressure so that we could be refined, or that Israel or the people of covenant could be refined. And so it wasn't done, you know, the world will crush you, you know, the world will stomp down on you with shoes or like anvils, you know, it'll crush the seed of your spirit. But in the wine press, in the vineyard, those trials and that refinement will be done in such a way so that your seed, your soul will not be crushed. So that it is in a controlled, almost like not a controlled environment, but done in such a way so that you would benefit from it. And also the master of the vineyard would benefit from it as well. And it's really important, I think, that people realize that, yes, the process of refinement does take place when you are in a relationship with God. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point if there's no refinement of your person, and there's no growing, and there's no development, and there's no greater understanding, and there's no learning? There's no point. And so this wine press is that process of refinement for those of the covenant. The other thing that is very interesting about this, we know the scripture from Isaiah where the Lord says, I have trodden the winepress alone. And that's Christ. He is the author and the finisher of our faith. He is the one that can develop us in such a way that we meet our potential, as we just read in John chapter 15. Without him, we are nothing. We cannot reach our potential. So with that refinement, through that relationship as a covenant people, we meet our potential. So that's the relationship we're in. And very often, as we're going to come to see, we take these things for granted because we get used to them. And as the cycle of pride seems to happen, is that we get used to that fence, we get used to that tower, we get used to those stones being gathered out of the midst of us, and we begin to forget. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, you know, you'd think after all that work, and it brought forth wild grapes. And it's just interesting how everybody on the internet jumps all over that word wild. You know, wild means it's not refined, untamed. And so that word wild to me works out okay. But many people want to say, well, the Hebrew word means that they're not only bad grapes, they're stinking and they're noxious, and they're just basically the fruit that they produce. It's not even going in the wine press. You can't do anything with it. There's no making anything out of what they're producing. These are bad grapes. Verse 3. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, same thing, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. So this is a really, and again, we sometimes we get these really powerful questions in the scriptures, and we don't even pause on them. God is asking you to judge him. Isn't that something? Isn't that something that God is asking you to judge him? He's saying, I want you to judge me right now. Verse 4, what could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? So God is asking you right here, what do you want? What did you want? What did you expect from a relationship with me? What do you want? And this is really, I think it's really important. I know that time is a factor for people, and people, on YouTube, they're like, don't have your videos more than this long and just like fast and skip over. It's like, no, that is not the scriptures. That is not how you approach the scriptures. You have to stop. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point if you are missing things for the sake of time? That doesn't make any sense to me. God is asking you to judge him, and he's saying, tell me what you want. And I think it's a really powerful question, because so many people do not ponder this. What do you want from God? Do you want him to remove all your trials? Do you want him to make everything easy? Do you want God to make it so nothing bad ever happens? No one ever gets sick. No one ever makes a mistake. Ponder this question, because very often you will discover that you're wrong in what you want, that you're wrong, that we agreed to come to a life of trial and error and learning by our mistakes and by our faith. And if we take those things away, then what are we learning and how are we growing? And I know personally, how many times have I prayed for something and I was wrong? I was wrong. I wanted things to be removed from me. I wanted things to go away, and I was wrong. And again, God proves, trust me, I know this hurts. And I know this is hard to learn, but trust me. And I have had to learn that lesson over and over and over again. And then that question keeps coming back. What do you want? What do you expect? How are you going to learn faith if you want God to be like a nanny or your butler, to just clean up all your messes and just clear out the way? Is that really what you think a relationship with God is, that he's your butler? Or that he's your gardener in such a way that he just, you never lift a finger and you just sit back and sip your drink while God does all the hard work? These are questions that you should spend time with in the scriptures, because they're really soul revealing. And they're really hard sometimes to ponder, because you remember why you're here and what this whole plan is about. It is about that relationship. Wherefore, this continuing on in verse 4, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. Again, that is emphasized again, wild grapes again. And I think he's addressing here our expectations, what we want. Our wild grapes are that we demand to have certain things. We think we're entitled to certain things. And I remember being visited by someone, and they were complaining bitterly because they paid tithing and they were still driving a Toyota. Like literally, this was a complaint. And I got to tell you, it was shocking. And I'm sure it probably read on my face. That's probably why I wasn't a very popular person when people shared such things with me, because I was thinking, well, you have a car, but they thought they were entitled to a Mercedes or something, or that, well, hey, I'm paying tithing. Where's my Tesla? And it's like, that to me is an example of a wild grape. It's this question that we have to ponder. What do you want from God more than he has given you? His presence in your life. He is the blessing. Feeling God's presence in your life, that is the miracle. That is the blessing, So it is really worthwhile addressing the questions in this chapter in your own life and really pondering them. And now here's the action. I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up. And I will break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And here's the thing. So often when we're in relationship with God and we're enjoying the blessings, we really lose track of those blessings. And we almost become blind to them, and we begin to take them for granted. And it's not until God says, okay, I'm going to take those away, and then let's see how well if this jogs your memory and raises your awareness of what was done for you and what has been done for you. And it's that cycle of pride, and you almost feel like, it's just like on the news when you see someone, a tornado hits or something, and, you see somebody's house behind them, or what's left of their house behind them in total shambles, just a pile of sticks. And they're like, oh, I am so grateful because we're all safe. And here's Fido. And, they're just so, and maybe 24 hours before, you might have heard somebody say, oh, this bathroom, if I have to look at this tile one more time, and, or they're complaining about, things. I know, because I'm guilty. I don't like the tile in my bathroom. So that's why I'm using that example. But I mean, we tend to get caught up in the things that don't matter. And so once again, God has to say, okay, let me remind you of what matters. And then we remember. So he's saying that in verse 6, and I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. It's not going to be attended to. There's not going to be that relationship there of refinement. And in fact, instead of having the wine press within the vineyard, now there is no vineyard because the walls have been removed and everything's going to be trampled. Now, whatever refinement, we're going to have to learn in the school of hard knocks, and we're going to realize once again everything that God has done for us in our relationship, and that we of ourselves can accomplish nothing, and that without God, we are nothing. Verse 7, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah, his pleasant plant, just saying, the same thing in a different way. And he looked for judgment. This is the fruit that God wanted. He wanted judgment. And I'm sure in this case it means Christ-like judgment. A judgment in the way that God would judge if he were there. The way Christ judged as he was on the earth, with compassion. And, he was always around people who seemed to be the most broken and the most in need. And he condemned those who were in positions of leadership that, condemned everybody else that Christ associated with. And so he's looking for that kind of judgment that he had when he was on the earth. And behold, But look, this is what he's saying. He was looking for this, but this is what he saw: oppression. And behold, oppression. And this is the thing, and it's so interesting, and I almost hate to bring it up because it's so negative. But when I was, doing some studying on the scripture in this chapter, and what I do is I just read it again and again and again, and I just listen to videos, and I just read what I can, and it's just, it's almost heartbreaking, because it is so clear in this chapter who is being addressed: the vineyard, the people of the covenant. And he's saying he looked for judgment, but behold, oppression. And what is this oppression? And you go back to this wine press and you think of the crushing of the grapes. And it's not even really crushing. That's probably the wrong word. They're being pressed. They're being pressed in such a way so that the seed remains, so that tannins are not released. This is the same principle. God was looking for this type of pressure, but he found that the seeds were crushed. And it's just that's almost keeping in line with that imagery, is that so many churches have become such that it's not where people go to be built to help them produce the fruit that their soul is capable of producing for goodness, where they're refined, where they're developed. No, it's where they are crushed to such a degree that they become bitter. And that's keeping in line with the imagery of the wine press and the grapes and the vineyard. This makes sense. And with that, I want to read this quote by Brigham Young from the teachings of Brigham Young. And it says, it has been the custom of parents to break the will until it is weakened, and the noble godlike powers of the child are reduced to a comparative state of imbecility and cowardice. Let that heaven-born property of human agents be properly tempered and wisely directed, instead of pursuing the opposite course, and it will conquer in the cause of right. Break not the spirit of any person, but guide it to feel that it is its greatest delight and highest ambition to be controlled by the revelations of Jesus Christ. Then the will of man becomes godlike in overcoming the evil that is sown in the flesh, until God shall reign within us to will and do of his good pleasure. And too often, churches where we go to be crushed, where our spirits are broken. Too often we leave church feeling horrible about ourselves, because the grapes have been crushed instead of the correct pressure applied. And as he says, that we are not properly tempered or taught, but we are crushed. And that is the complaint of so many people who come to resent religions in general, is that they were made to feel awful about themselves. What does that accomplish? What does it accomplish for a pastor or preacher or bishop or any person in a position of leadership? It could be a teacher. It could be, someone that just visits you in your home. What is the point of religion if all you do is diminish people to such a degree that they are crushed instead of the correct amount of pressure applied, so that they may produce the desired wine or the desired outcome of this vineyard? And too many people, unfortunately, who are in religion just feel that the way to teach and guide and lead people is to crush people. and it's to make them feel horrible about themselves. In particular, you see it a lot. This chapter, just for some reason, is like the ticket for people to rail against homosexuality, for example. And they use it to say, this is not genetic. This is something, this is just a choice. And they will use this chapter as the opportunity. And it's not funny. I'm not laughing because of that. It's just so hilarious to me, because at the very beginning, it's very clear who God is addressing. He's talking to the people of the covenant. He's talking to people of the covenant. He's talking to all them rule keepers for the most part, but they have forgotten their dependency or how dependent they are on God. And they're starting to pat themselves on the back for their own works, and they're starting to think, who needs a tower? Who needs a fence? We're cruising here, you know. And they forget how dependent they are on that relationship with God, because they're starting to prosper in such a way that they feel like, we're pretty good, you know, we're pretty good without all, you know, divine intervention. And so it's just, to me, I am just amazed that there are people out there in the world, religious and not religious, that actually think, most people, of course there's always the exception, most people just want to fit in. Most people just want to be normal. Most people just want that standard, you know, of what, you know, everybody else has, that they are gonna have. They're gonna grow up and meet Prince Charming, or, you know, this princess, and they're gonna get married and they're gonna have kids. Most people have a very basic list of what they expect. And not many people say, I want to grow up and be radically different from everybody else. Maybe now it's a little different because it's a little more in vogue, and some people are experimenting where they probably wouldn't normally. But normally that's gonna, you know, a time will prove their true attractions, and that's all gonna work out. But for those who are religious and they are met, for example, with the trial of same-sex attraction, to accuse that person of choosing this, of being abnormal, of having to fight against something that is constantly condemned within them, to me, this is a perfect example of God looking for judgment, and behold, oppression. Because there's no compassion and there's no understanding. Neither is there in an attempt to understand. Neither is there an attempt to try to empathize and understand someone else and someone else's trials. It is just condemnation. And so if anything, this chapter is not, as the pastors and the teachers and all those people out there are trying to make it. They're trying to make it seem like, oh, this is all about the sinners out there in the world. No, this is about the people of the covenant and the people of the vineyard. He looked for judgment, and behold, oppression. They were crushing people's souls in one way or another, instead of applying the correct amount of direction and pressure, however you want to put it, using that metaphor of the wine press, to help people meet their potential and to help people meet God in their lives. No, they just... He looked for judgment, and behold, oppression, for righteousness, and behold, a cry. Again, we feel the wounds, a cry. He's looking for this goodness, these shepherds, these people that are going to stand in his shoes, that are going to be his hands, his arms, his eyes, who are going to be his servants and serve his purpose if he were here. But no, instead of that, he hears a cry. He hears sorrow. This is in the vineyard, or what's left of it. And like I said, instead of people using this chapter as an opportunity to self-reflect, am I building people or am I crushing people as a leader in Israel or as a leader in the vineyard? No, they're turning this all around and saying this has nothing to do with people who claim to be in a relationship with God. This is all about the world out there. And it's like, how can you read it like that? How can you read it like that when he clearly says the vineyard is the house of Israel? Woe unto them that, verse 8, woe unto them that join house to house till there can be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. Isn't that interesting? People who surround themselves so they get the impression that they're in their own little kingdom. You know, that's pretty clear to me that those who are extremely wealthy, and if you look at the world of religion, those who are in the top positions of leadership, they have pretty big houses. And a lot of them have a lot of land and a lot of property, and they're in their own little kingdoms when they go home. Woe unto them that, you know, house to house, it's so big, it's like many houses all in one. Till there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the world. So, by the way, so that's one reading. Then there's this other reading too, because there's this comment there. It says, woe unto them that join house to house, till there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the earth. So here's another reading. This can also mean, woe unto them that just cram each other in. You're in such tight quarters. You're all jammed in a city to the point where there is no solitude. There's no place to walk off alone. You cannot be alone. You know, in the book of Mark in the New Testament, Christ constantly sought a place to gather his thoughts and to commune with his Father. He looked for solitude, for a place where he could, you know, have that communion. And he's in verse 8, it says, woe unto them that join house to house till there be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. So it's just real interesting, because you can read it like, oh, woe unto them that just like gather land and, you know, so they can be alone in the earth, or woe unto them so that they can't be. They can't be in the midst of the earth. There's no peace. There's no solitude. There's no quiet spot for them to have a moment alone with God. They're just so crowded in. So this verse can really have two things, and both of them, either one is not ideal. Either one is a problem, apparently. But most people, as I've mentioned listening, most people interpret this as like greedy people that just gather land and they want to pretend like they're alone in the world. But honestly, you can read it either way. Woe unto them that join house to house, so there be no place. There's no place that they may be placed alone in the earth. So it's overcrowding. You know, we tend to live on top of each other in some places, so that there is no peace. There's no quiet. There's no, all hours of the night. If you live in the city, there is no silence. There is no moment of rest for your poor ears. You know, there's no little quiet place. You think of different people in the scriptures who went off, you know, in the wilderness to go pray or something. There's nothing like that for them. So yeah, woe unto those who have no place to go to commune with God, or to be alone, or to have that solitude. Verse 9, in mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth, many houses shall be desolate, and great and fair cities without inhabitant. So he's talking about the future. There's going to be desolation that will come upon the land when we live in such a way where we no longer have a relationship with God. Because now this is a description of what it's like without that hedge, and without that fence, and without that protection, and without that relationship of God removing certain things and providing us that wine press within the vineyard. Now this is what it's like without that relationship with God. Of a truth, many houses shall be desolate, and great and fair cities without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of a homer shall yield an ephah, or ephah, however you want to pronounce it. Apparently, the earth is going to give 1/10 of its yield, or there's going to be scarcity in such a way that we're going to have to put in 10 times the amount of work to get, what we usually get for 1/10 of the labor, or vice versa. And it's, of course, the numbers, the link to tithing, we give 1/10 and we get the windows of heaven. Now the curse is you're going to work 10 times as hard and get the same amount, or you're going to plant 10 times as much, or you're going to plant the same amount and only get 1/10. It's almost like this is the reverse of tithing. Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink that continue until night, and wine inflame them. Of course, this is, most religious people are like, drinking is bad, drinking is wrong. However, if you really think about this for a minute, how many alcoholics do you know get up early in the morning? If you're truly an alcoholic, generally getting up early in the morning is really hard. So this isn't so much about being an alcoholic. This is someone who's in denial. They just want to get up and they want to be distracted with whatever it is. It could be alcohol. It could be Netflix. It could be their job. It could be whatever. They are in denial. They just want to consume something so that wine inflame them. Inflame them is to make people feel a certain way, to intensify their feelings in some way, to enhance their life in some way. Does it have to be wine? Absolutely not. It can be any number of things. It could be shopping. Woe unto them that get up early in the morning to go on Amazon. Something, it is just something so that they don't have to think about the way things are. These are people in denial. These are not necessarily alcoholics. Because listen to the next verse 12. And the harp and the viol, the tabret and the pipe, and wine are in their feasts. Since when, if you're an alcoholic, do you need music? You know what I mean? So this is all about people that just want distraction. They want to party. They want to feel like everything is fine the way it is. And that can be, you can replace wine with anything. Shopping. Oh, here, let me redo my house for the 50 billionth time. Let me redo my kitchen. Let me do this. Let me do that. Let me, go work on frivolous things, because the wine really is symbolic of something that's really a waste of time. Essentially, when it comes to things of the spirit, it's just, so is the harp and the viol and the tabret and the pipe, for that matter. These are things that are just distractions, and we get up early in the morning to do them until late at night. And, we are engaged in our feast. Meanwhile, while the hedge has been broken down, our cities are becoming desolate. Our homes are becoming desolate. The cities are, the world is going down down the toilet, but we're getting up early to party. And that's the imagery here. Now, if you tap on the different things, it's like word of wisdom, alcoholism, people are going to spend so much time talking about alcohol, when in reality, it's just whatever we do to numb ourselves to the reality of how things are going in this world. And it could be your drug of choice. It doesn't have to have anything to do with wine or any type of drug. It could be exercise. Some people, their drug of choice is running or type of exercise. It's shopping. It's their job. It's, there are so many things that people can deep dive in from the morning until evening to distract their minds from the way things are and from the way the world is turning out. But it says, they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands, because they don't have a relationship with God. So they pick other things to fill their time. And this is not an opportunity to bash on people who are alcoholics. It absolutely isn't, because now we know that alcoholism is a disease. Or do we know that? Do we know that? Because According to YouTube and all the pastors there, apparently that news has not hit the Christian world yet. That alcoholism is not a choice, it is a disease. And too many people are very quick. Well, they chose it in the first place. No, people don't choose to be alcoholics. And I recommend a really excellent book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. And he is an expert on all kinds of addiction, not just drugs. There's also shopping addictions. There's all kinds of addictions. And that it really has a lot to do with the formation of our brain. And so Christians don't want to bother with educating themselves on physiology and on research and science. They really don't. They want to just condemn people and just say, this is all about alcoholics. Oh, really? Because it's talking about, again, the vineyard and the people of the covenant. What, pick your drug of choice, it could be food for some people. Whatever it is to distract you from the way the world is going. And these are generally people that have stopped considering the operation of his hands, how he is working. The operation of his hands, it's such an interesting term because you can know a lot about God. You can know a lot about the scriptures. You can know, but are you really considering what are the operations of his hands? What would he do if he were here? Are you really thinking about that? Because would Christ lock himself up all day being distracted with his, means of employment? Would Christ be so distracted with redecorating his house for the billionth time? Would Christ be so engaged in studying the Word of God even that he has no time to go have dinner with those who have no friends or whatever? This is what I'm saying. These are those people that he's talking to that do not regard the work of the Lord. What is the work of the Lord? Mankind is his work. Mortals are his work. The operation of his hands is helping to bring them to him. And if you're not considering the work of his hands and the operation of his hands, then you are those people that are distracted with the vial and the heart, the tabret and the pipe, and pick your drug of choice. Here it's alcohol, is the metaphor, but it is a metaphor. This is not an opportunity to turn around and bash people that might have a problem with the substance. So this chapter for me is all about, this is more to the pastors and the leaders and the teachers, those who are put themselves in positions of power and influence in churches. This chapter especially. Therefore, so that word means because of all this, what I just read, because of all these things that I just described, my people are gone into captivity. They're captives. They are no longer free because they have no knowledge. And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. There is a spiritual famine. When that relationship with God becomes unimportant or disregarded, people stop considering the work of his hands. What is his work? And what is the operation of his hands? When that is over, then it affects people and they go into captivity. Captivity, again, is being, it could be any number of things. It's being led about by false doctrines. It's having a false understanding of what is important. It is being made to feel as though you have no power in and of yourself to make a choice and to do your own learning and your own studying in pursuit of your own relationship with God. You're made to feel like, well, I got to follow these people and do whatever they're doing. And you're not doing anything on your own. You are in captivity. You're captivity because you're relying on someone else's level of spiritual understanding and someone else's the depth of their relationship with God. And if their relationship isn't really that deep, and how would you know, really? I mean, someone can look, even the devil himself can appear nigh unto an angel of light. How do you know? How do you know the depth of someone's relationship with God? Unless the Spirit has manifested it to you. But even then, we are not, like Brigham Young said, if we were to judge people, we ruin everything. We don't know. We are in captivity when we rely on other people for our relationship with God. That is a form of captivity. And it leads to a spiritual famine if those people that we rely on are not what they claim to be. Therefore, again, because of this spiritual famine, and because of this lack of knowledge, and because the people of the vineyard are not, they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider their operation of his hands. And because he looked for judgment, and behold oppression, for righteousness, and behold a cry, because of all these things, therefore, because of this, hell hath enlarged herself. Congratulations, you just made hell even bigger. Because you diminished heaven on earth. It is astounding to me that this can be so clear in the scriptures. And yet, for most people will read this and will say, oh, well, this doesn't apply to people of the church. This doesn't apply to people of the covenant or Christians at all. This is exactly to whom Isaiah is speaking, to whom the Lord is speaking. Because the people of the vineyard failed. Because the people of the vineyard failed in their relationship. That's why hell got bigger. Yes, hell, of course, hell by and large is getting bigger because of the way of the world. But when the people of the covenant begin to oppress, and their quote unquote righteousness produces sorrow in others, when they no longer consider what is important to God and what is his work and what is the work of him, what is the operation, what is the actual doings of his hands, when those are no longer regarded, hell gets bigger. Hell is empowered. Hell gets the upper hand. And that's what is so, it just drives me nuts, because he makes it so clear. Isaiah can't be more clear. He spells it out in verse 7. He can't say it any more clear. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. People say, oh, Isaiah is so confusing. Really? He just says right here for that. He spells it out to you. For the vineyard is the house of Israel. And many Christians believe that they are adopted into the Abrahamic covenant, into the house of Israel. Well, then you Christians, this is a chapter speaking to you. This is talking to you. But no, they want to say this is all about the world. We don't make hell bigger. Yes, you do. There's nothing worse than people that have the truth and they use it for their own gain, to line their own pockets, and to consume everything on their own lusts. How many pastors are disgustingly wealthy? Horrifically wealthy. If they were Christ-like, wouldn't they just have sandals and a robe? He didn't even have a place to lay his head. And yet today's pastor feels that they are 100% entitled to oodles and oodles and oodles of stuff. Right. Of course hell hath enlarged itself, because the very leaders of the people who claim to be representatives of Christ in the vineyard have nothing to do with the operation of his hands or his work. Ooh. And opened her mouth. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. So all those people, glory is something that generally is associated with religious things. And their multitude and their pomp and circumstance, all their rituals and all their show, all the things they show, and they're rejoicing and they're singing and they're this and that are going to descend into it, because he looked for righteousness and behold oppression. Or he looked for judgment and behold oppression, for righteousness and behold a cry. And because even though these people are in the vineyard and they say they're of the vineyard, they do not represent his work or the operation of his hands. I see that we're like way out of time, so I'm going to have to stop here. And we're just going to have to pick up in verse 20 next time. But again, I just want to remind you, you are a child of God. You are divine. And as such, and as God's child, you will not fulfill your purpose if you leave a void in your life, and that is your spiritual life. Nothing will satisfy your soul more than your relationship with God, more than having that divine connection and that spiritual refinement. Is it always easy? Of course not. Learning anything or growing and developing any skill is not easy. Learning new things is not easy. There is always an amount of struggle, but that struggle produces fruit. And it is in that fruit that we can find so much joy. And as a child of God, you will find no greater joy than in seeking out that relationship with the divine and letting God become the finisher of your faith and having that beautiful dependence upon him, which is not only protection from the world. I know that pastors always like, oh, we're protected from the devil and from the evil people around it. No, sometimes it's just protection from yourself. We are mortal beings with failings and weaknesses, but we are still divine. We are still divine, which means we are entitled to divine help for protection, even from our own selves and our own weaknesses. And that's the beauty of being a child of God, that you are in embryo, your potential is limitless. And I just hope that you're worshiping in a place that has the power and the ability and the divinity to admit that institutions are imperfect, people are imperfect. And part of this whole plan in our life is to grow and through our relationship with that precious, precious vine. And I'll talk to you again soon.